Okay, guys, we're back with another video, another podcast, and in today's video, I kind of wanted to talk about Star Citizen's story. Now, to me, this is kind of the backbone of the game, the reason why people are gonna stick around, in my opinion. The tech is kind of its biggest selling feature. A lot of people are excited about the possibility of playing a space game on this scale with full persistence, where you can go anywhere and do anything. A game that has salvage and cargo and combat and piracy. Essentially, the idea of this game is extremely attractive to a lot of people. A lot of people in the space genre, sci-fi fans, essentially. But for me, I feel like the biggest reason why Star Citizen can do what it's doing, and the biggest reason why the game makes sense, is because of the story. Star Citizen's story is kind of different from other science fiction space stories because it is essentially trying to be as realistic as possible. They are essentially trying to say that from now to 1,000 years, this is what happens to humanity. That we have essentially discovered the ability to travel faster than the speed of light, and we have expanded out into the universe, and we have essentially settled all of these star systems, and we have terraformed planets, and we've essentially done all of these specific things to get us to this point in, sci-fi, where it makes sense for an average person to own a spaceship and fly around and do business. So I kind of want to dive into that in this video and compare Star Citizen's story a little bit to other sci-fi space-based stories. I know this might trigger a lot of people, but in this video, I'm gonna compare it to Star Wars and Star Trek, Dune, and to a lesser extent even Foundations. Okay, because these are, to me, the four cornerstone sci-fi space stories. If you think about sci-fi space story, these are the four stories that you're going to think about. You're going to think about Star Wars, Star Trek, Dune, and Foundations. Those are in my opinion, those are the first four stories that's going to come to mind when you think about space sci-fi. Okay? So, how does Star Citizen story stack up? Well, Star Citizen story, in my opinion, is geared to a game like this. It's specifically designed for a video game. It's not like Star Wars or those other stories that are centered around telling a character-driven story. This is kind of on like a different scale than those other stories. So this story's kind of designed better for the Star Citizen universe. To build the universe first, it gives you the ability to tell stories in that universe. With a story like Star Wars, they essentially built the story first and the universe around the story. So it's a little bit harder to tell a story centered in that universe. You know what I mean? With Star Citizen, they built out first, and now they're building inwards. With those other stories, they built inwards, and now they're building outwards. So it's less successful. If you look at Star Wars, for instance, it was designed around Darth Vader and the Death Star and Luke and Leia and the Millennium Falcon. That is the core of that story. The the story of the rebels and the Empire. And after that story got told, what you have left is smaller side stories that have no choice but to kind of play second fiddle to this main story, because this main story was so imposing, so overarching. It's not something that you can get away from, where this main story touched on every aspect of the universe. You can't tell a story based in Star Wars' universe and not have it touch on the Empire or the Rebels or the Trade Federation or the Jedi or the Sith. These plot points are so all-encompassing that they are what make up that universe. And the same thing is kind of true with Star Trek. Starfleet and their mission to explore the deepest regions of the universe, to boldly go where no one's gone before. That idea, that central story is so overimposing in the Star Trek universe that you really can't tell a story that deviates from Starfleet or the other aliens that come in contact with Starfleet, like the Klingons and the Vulcans. And the same thing is true for Dune. Again, Dune's story focuses around their empire being so heavily reliant on the spice from the planet Arrakis. So any story you want to tell about that universe, it is lesser to than the main story about House Atreides getting possession of Arrakis and fighting with House Harkonnen, because the Emperor is afraid House Atreides is too strong. You could tell some smaller stories in that universe, because again, the Empire is so big in the Dune universe, but you are very limited in what you can do because of the way the story is designed. You look at the way space travel is in the Dune universe, and it kind of makes the possibility of things like capital ship space battles impossible, because because of the way ships are navigated, and how you need navigators, and how they have the tunnel that the spaceships, they essentially in the Dune universe, spaceships go out into space, enter this tunnel, and come out on the side where their destination is. Kind of like space travel in the Dune universe is more like teleportation, in my personal opinion, than actual space travel. You are not spending years in space in cryosleep. You essentially just go in the ship and arrive at your destination. It's not, you don't need all this other explanation behind what's going on, because you've explained it by, you have these giant ships, you have the tunnel, I forget what you call it now, and then you have the navigators and their guild, and the story is more about power and controlling resources, and an empire on the brink of human evolution, essentially. And the same thing could kind of be said for Foundations. You look at the story in Foundations, and it's really just the Emperor versus the other planet leaders versus the possibility that the Empire is going to collapse. It is a story about a prophecy, and if you want to tell any other smaller stories in that, the idea of this prophecy that the Empire is going to collapse is so imposing, it's so overpowering, that telling another story or a side story within that universe is very difficult, because it's ultimately going to have something to do with this prophecy that the Empire is eventually going to collapse. That prophecy in the story causes so much chaos in the Empire and Foundations that there's really nothing else going on in that universe, a story that can be told in a relevant manner that doesn't have something to do with this overall story. If you're going to tell a story in that universe, it you're not utilizing the intellectual property of the original story if you try to tell a story in that universe that deviates from the original IP. So you get a situation where you have, the Han Solo movie, or the more recent Obi-Wan TV show. You're trying to tell stories in this universe that has to play into the main story so much, that fans have such a close attachment to. And it's not just sci-fi, it's even, we're seeing the same thing happen with Lord of the Rings, and this new TV show that Amazon is doing. And fans have such a close attachment with the original IP and what originally happened, that telling a story that people know of in a new way, it's just not going to feel right. And telling a new story in that universe, it's not going to feel right either. It's because the original story is so imposing, so overpowering, that yes, you could do prequels, yes, you could do sequels, kind of like how they did the new Star Wars movies, with Rey and Finn and all those characters. And those are fine movies on their own. But the biggest problem with them is what they're coming from. What the original story is. This is not, a story about people in space living on different planets. This is a Star Wars story. And to stay true to that, you have to essentially capture what that original story captured. So a lot of times it's hard to create content for stories like that are new. So if a studio went out to buy an intellectual property like Star Wars, I mean, you're fighting an uphill battle to try to create something better than the original content. Okay, that's just the honest truth, because the original story is so imposing, so all-encompassing, that to create content that's better than the original, you have to go in a different direction. So to me, that's the major advantage. Okay, so for me here now, when we start to get into Star Citizen's actual story, okay, it to me is the major advantage for the game, and why it's successful as a science fiction story is because it essentially emulates all of the classic sci-fi tropes that we already know and love. Essentially, a lot of people like to say that, its story kind of borrows a little bit from every story. How, some ships are essentially copies of other ships from sci-fi. And it's not that they're copies, but they essentially fit that role. So from a sci-fi perspective, you have all these other stories inside of the universe. So if you want to be like Han Solo, or if you want to live the life a firefly, or if you want to live on a planet like Dune and battle sandworms, it essentially has all of these other stories inside of its story, if that makes any sense. So, if you wanted to tell the story of Dune, or Foundations, or Star Wars, or Star Trek, you could tell those stories and essentially feel like you're in those sci-fis in this one. So essentially there's, exploration class ships for you to do exploration, like Star Trek. And there are X-Wing like fighters and Millennium Falcon like ships for you to essentially imagine you in that universe. And there are, planets with sandworms if you want to imagine that you're in that universe. So because of that, it's a kind of sandbox that gives you an opportunity to live out all these other sci-fis within its story. So you could pick a different system in the story and make your own, or live out another story. And it's not that, okay, you could compare it to Starfield story, where I don't know what Starfield story is going to be, but from what I've seen so far, Starfield story is going to be centered around a specific event. It is going to be based on, it is going to be built like other sci-fi stories, where this story is the most important thing that's happening in this universe. And that's just not the case with Star Citizen. In Star Citizen, there's no one story that is the most important story. They've built the universe first, and in this universe anything can happen. Any story can be told. It's not about one specific story. It's not about one specific person. In fact, they do everything in their power to make, specific players feel irrelevant, to feel like you're just another person living life. You're not special. You're not the hero. You're just you. And you have to make a name for yourself. You have to do things to make yourself important, because at the end of the day, everybody's just trying to fight to survive, to be important, to matter, to leave their mark, to leave the universe in a better state than they found it. And that's more similar to reality than a lot of the other sci-fi stories, where yes, the main star is the hero, and yes, the main star saves the universe, and yes, other people are not as important. If you look at Star Wars, there's maybe a dozen individuals that matter in a universe of billions, and that's just not realistic. That's not how the real world works. And it's harder to make a story where so few individuals are important. If you make a story where no one is important, no one is the hero, anybody could be the hero. And so from that perspective, you could make any story you want. If Netflix went to CIG and said, hey, we want to make a story about Pyro, that's incredibly easy. You can take all of the lore from that system with Xenothreat and Ruin Station and the other gangs, and you can make dozens of TV shows from just this core concept that this is a star system that has gone through the ringer. This is a star system that nobody wants. This is a star system that is overrun by gangs. And you can tell a million stories within that context, within that premise, you can tell a story about Xenothreat. Where did they come from? Make a show that's just about Xenothreat and Ruin Station. Make a show that's just about where the fire rats came from. Make a show just about how the overlords want to try to rule the system. Make a story about how this new people are trying to come into the star system and make it safer. Okay, so from that aspect, you can make dozens of stories, and they'll all be good in their own right. They won't have another overarching story that's casting a giant shadow over them. They have the freedom to be their own story and to be good on their own. You won't look at them through the lens of, okay, this is the main story, so how does this matter? Why does this matter? Why am I watching this? No, you're looking at it from the perspective as, this is the story that I have that I'm trying to engage with. You're not looking at, okay, in Star Wars' case, you know about Darth Vader, you know about Luke and Leia. So when you want to tell a story about Obi-Wan and how he got to where he was in Episode 4, A New Hope, doing that right is an uphill battle, in my opinion. But in Star Citizen's case, you have a clean slate. You have things to work off of, because every system, like, you take the Bremen system for instance, and there's a story behind the system. Something simple as, okay, you have proximity to the Vega system, you have proximity to the Nyx system. If you wanted to make a story that if you want to make a story that encompasses trade routes in the Bremen system, you're not starting from scratch. You have a premise to go off of, and then you can tie that into the overall story. So on top of telling a story about the Bremen system, you can tell a story about the UEE as a whole, about the Imperator, about the Vandul. Maybe the Vandul attacked the Bremen system because the Bremen system is, a heavy military system. So maybe the Vandul decide, okay, if we attack here, that's a major UEE stronghold or something. So you can tell a lot of stories in that universe. It's not like Star Trek or Star Wars or Dune or Foundations, because they created the universe first. They didn't create a single story that essentially explains the universe. There's no explanation for this universe. The explanation for this universe is mankind worked to expand its resources because it wanted to survive. It's a story about survival. It's a story about expansion. It's essentially what we're living now, just in 1,000 years. That's it. And it's very relatable because it is just because the only difference between a story that you could tell now and a story that you could tell in this universe is that 1,000 years have passed. But people will be the same. I mean, in this specific situation, society is mostly the same. So it's, in my opinion, less of an uphill battle. You have a lot more opportunity to do a lot more, to be a lot more successful. And that's why it's so exciting to a lot of people. This whole idea of imagine what it would be like, imagine what you would do, imagine who you would be. It's very easy to imagine because it is just like if somebody gave you a blank check right now, a clean slate, right now in your life right now, what would you do? Who would you be? You have the opportunity to go out and do those things. If you want to do salvage, if you want to do cargo, if you want to be a pilot, if you want to be a doctor, you can be all those things in this universe and tell that story, and it will be successful. It will be, you're not the hero of the universe, you're the hero of your specific story. And in my opinion, that's a lot easier to approach. It's a lot easier for that to be attractive to a lot of people than, say, trying to make Paul Atreides, or for everyone to try to see themselves in Paul Atreides. I might not see myself in Paul Atreides. I might not see myself in Luke Skywalker. But in Star Citizen, I don't have to. Because in Star Citizen, I'm me. I'm not Paul Atreides. I'm not Luke Skywalker. I'm me in the Star Citizen universe. And so that's really attractive. And I mean, even in Starfield, even though you are yourself in Starfield, the person in Starfield is the key to that story. I don't need to be the key to anything. My story can unfold as I play the game, as I engage with the universe. I have a potential to go to any of these places and do anything. And that's why emergent gameplay is also so much more powerful in this game. Because, in my opinion, it's not the wizard versus the warrior. It's you see another player and you have no idea who they are, or what they are, or what they do, or what they stand for. Okay? And it's that engagement that normally, if you look at an MMO and you come across another player, they are, they're the paladin, or they're the horde, they're an orc, they're an elf. Right away you can tell what they're about, who their guild is. And that's just not the case with Star Citizen. You walk right past someone else, you have no idea if they're the most powerful dogfighter in the game, or if they're just a noob in cool armor. You have no idea. You have no idea what somebody else is capable of until you get to know them. And that really encourages you to expand your horizon. So again, this is just an opinion. Let me know what you guys think. Like the video if you want to see more videos like this. Subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Salute.